Thank you, everyone, for your patience. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order at 5:38 p.m. Members present, we have Michael Polson, Cara Espera, and Wendy Smith. The meeting has been properly noticed and posted according to law.
All right, good evening. Apologies again for my late arrival. Traffic on the highway was a nightmare, so I appreciate your patience. This is the meeting of the Shorewood Board of Appeals, and we have a number of items that we have on our agenda for tonight. First on our agenda is item number 4, which is consideration of our meeting minutes from February 13th, 2024, which are included in the agenda packet. Do members of the board have any suggested revisions or corrections?
I do not.
Okay, hearing no corrections, and I have none to offer. Those meeting minutes as drafted are approved. All right. Next on our item, it appears that we have 3 requests for a variance to various zoning ordinances in the village. We'll review the standards by which the Board of Appeals will abide. In the absence of our village attorney, I will provide those standards, and those standards will apply to all of the variance requests that we hear tonight. So for the items we have under consideration today, we are bound to abide by the standards of review for variances. Pursuant to the Village of Shorewood Municipal Code Section 535-52, our board may hear appeals from persons aggrieved by any administrative order, decision, or determination, and may hear and grant applications for variances and exceptions to our zoning provisions of the municipal code. So in consideration of a variance request, the board may hear and grant such an appeal as will not be contrary to public interest, where, owing to special conditions, literal enforcement will result in practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship, so that the spirit and purpose of our municipal code in zoning shall be observed and the public safety, welfare, and justice secured. The board shall not grant use variances. So in reviewing a request for a variance pursuant to Municipal Code Section 535-58, no variance shall be granted by the board unless it finds all of the following. Here's our criteria. A, there must be exceptional, extraordinary, or unusual circumstances or conditions applying to the lot, parcel, or structure that do not apply generally to other properties in the same district, and the granting the variance would not be of so general or recurrent of nature to suggest that the municipal zoning code chapter should be changed in total. And the variance will not create substantial detriment to adjacent property and will not materially impair or be contrary to the purpose and spirit of the municipal zoning code chapter or the public interest. So these are the standards by which we review requests for variances. And with those standards, we'll proceed to item number 6 on our agenda, which is stated as a request for variance for zoning ordinance 535-26A and 535-19F at residential property 3556 North Murray Avenue. And how this will proceed is for the applicants asking for a variance, you'll have an opportunity to speak about your request. We'll open the hearing portion of each of these variance requests with a statement from the village, and then a statement from the applicant for the variance, with an opportunity for any interested parties from the public or adjacent properties to also provide some testimony as well before the board enters into a deliberatory discussion phase where we determine whether the request meets our criteria for granting a variance. So that's how we'll proceed. Let's start with, again, item number 6. This relates to 3556 North Murray Avenue. Inspector Burris, do you have a statement to provide on this request?
Yes.
Boya, can you swear him in?
Inspector Barris, can you raise your right hand? Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. So the property owners Excuse me for interrupting, but I can't hear. Make sure you speak into the microphone. Thank you.
Yes, seeking a variance to construct a new 20 by 22 detached garage to replace an existing legal non-conforming 20.4 foot by 22 detached garage in the same general location. The village received the building permit application on February 13th and the Board of Appeals application on February 15th of this year. The applicable regulations are 535-26A in that accessory structures shall not occupy more than 10% of a lot. And then 535-19F lot coverage. So maximum 10% of lot coverage is allocated for accessory structures. The existing site conditions are that both the parcel and the existing garage on the lot are both legal non-conforming. The maximum, or rather the minimum lot width in the village is 40 feet, and this lot is 34 feet. The minimum area of a lot is 4,500 square feet. This lot is 3,995 square feet. There is no variance on record for the existing garage that was constructed in, say, 1966. The existing garage does not meet the setback requirements, and the construction of the new and slightly smaller proposed garage would correct that, that setback issue. Within our packet, we have the building permit application, the denial letter, the Board of Appeals application, and a number of surveys and aerials of the property.
At this time, do board members have questions for Inspector Burris relating to this property? Hearing none. Thank you, Inspector Burris. Do we have a representative of the applicant for this property? Okay. Would you like to provide a statement for us? Can you please see that microphone in the corner over there? You might need to kind of pull it around. Yeah, thank you. And since we do have a member that's appearing virtually today, if you could speak into the microphone, that would be great. And introduce your name and address for Toya to swear you in.
I'm Paul Mellenbeck, and I reside at 3556 North Murray. And,
Excuse me, Paul. Sorry. Can you raise your right hand? Do
okay,
you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
it is.
Thank you.
Please provide us with a statement as to why you're requesting this variance so that we can understand your property better.
Okay. I don't know if you want the whole backstory, but this all started in October. And I was taking my wife to a therapy right after she had her knee replaced, and she wanted me to turn the car around so she could access the passenger door. I turned it around, and as I was backing in, I was more concerned about her, and I didn't notice that I didn't clear the left side. And so I badly damaged that support member. So after that, I had to have the overhead removed, and I had to have everything braced because I was anticipating a renewal, a repair and renewal. As we started down that road towards that, some structural damage showed up that the foundation was cracked, and so I had that replaced. But then further down the road, I rediscovered that the masonry blocks were 8 inches and they were set on a 6-inch curb. So this is a structural deficit already. And then the support members for the siding were 2x4s, were all out of whack. They were out of plumb. And there was a gap at the bottom where the plank that normally sits on the foundation would have a gap, a deficit. And so it was all structurally unsound. So I went back to the garage people, and they sent in the plans for replacing the same size garage. It was then that I realized that it was out of code. It was turned down. So I'm applying for a variance just so I can have the same size garage that I'm used to. I do not have any storage other than the garage as far as my wife's gardening equipment, the lawn care equipment, the snow blowers, all this kind of stuff. I have a toolbox that I inherited from my son when he died, and I use that to work on the car and the house. So the work that I do in the house, I have ladders and tall horses, stuff like that, but I'd have to get rid of some of that stuff if I went to a smaller garage. I guess that's,
Is there anything unique about your property that you can highlight for us that warrants replacement of the garage as it was, as opposed to building a smaller or more differently situated garage?
well, the question was, what would the neighbors think, and it's actually the same size. It's not going to be any different. But, and it's also going to be much better because it'll be a new garage instead of the eyesore that I have sitting there now. Because I can't park inside because of the braces, and so I'm parking on the apron and there's no overhead door, and it's just a mess. And so the sooner I can get going on the plans to replace would be great.
Okay, thank you. I'll open this up for members of the board to ask questions of our applicant.
I have none.
Is there room to build additional?
I could, but it would take up part of my wife's garden and it'd shoot me, but I imagine there is.
Okay. Okay, and is this what is the size of the garage? Is it a 2-car garage or,
Yes.
okay. So, and do you have the need for a 2-car garage as opposed to a 1-car garage, assuming that a 1-car garage could hold tools and things of that nature?
Oh, we do have 2 cars.
Okay. And so looking at the overhead of your property, it looks as though this is a fairly narrow lot.
Mhm.
And if I'm understanding Inspector Burris correctly, the issue here is not with setback, but it's with percentage of lot coverage.
Correct.
Correct. So it's in excess of 10%. Is it in, how much over is it?
I want to say it's, the existing garage is about 22% greater than what is allowed. It's, the existing garage is 22% greater than
2%
what is
greater.
allowed.
Okay. So it's not 22% of the lot
No.
coverage? Okay.
No. No, it is, I didn't,
Doesn't necessarily have to be precise math, but I'm just kind of
Right,
trying to get a
yeah.
scope of how much over this is.
Inspector Burris, maybe a different way of looking at that same question is they're proposing a 440 square foot garage. Maximum permitted would be essentially 400 square feet. So it is 40 square feet larger than permitted, or approximately 10% larger than would be permitted. But it apparently is a standard 2-car garage.
correct.
Thank you, Mike. That's helpful. Okay. All right. Continuing questions for our applicant before, okay. Kara, any other questions? All right. Any further statement from the applicant that any information that you'd like us to know about this request?
No, I'd just like to have a decision so I can get moving forward because it's been a challenge.
Well, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Are there any other, you can have a seat. Are there any other interested parties that would like to make a statement relating to this request? All right. Hearing none, are we ready to proceed with deliberation amongst board members? And if so, may I have a motion to consider to open up debate? Is that seconded, Mike?
I didn't hear the motion, but
Move to open to consider to debate.
okay. Second,
Okay. All right. So our criteria here is to assess whether this property meets the request, the variance request criteria. in that we're looking for unique or special circumstances relating to this exact property to justify rebuilding the garage at approximately 110% of what is the allowable lot coverage size. Do we have any thoughts on whether this property can justify those variance request requirements?
I mean, I think the lot is. But and neighboring lots as well.
Yeah, although this does appear to be kind of your standard size 2-car garage, we are going off of percentage of lot size. So even though this is a very narrow lot, the ordinance requires no more than the 10% max coverage, which makes it a little bit tricky to justify in terms of whether there are special circumstances, although I do understand that replacing a existing legal non-conforming garage with pretty much exactly the same thing isn't terribly, offensive. Mike, do you have thoughts on whether we can justify a variance here?
In my opinion, I think we can because of the substandard size of the lot. 2-car garages are standard, are essentially a necessity in today's environment. So in order to accommodate what I consider an essential use of a lot, and given the minimal variation of the standard garage size from the permitted square footage of a new garage, I think we're within the limits of finding that it would be a practical hardship and on an applicant for the use of this particular property to have a full residential use of this particular property without a 2-car garage. So that I think we can find that there are unusual circumstances that do not generally apply to the village. Clearly, there are other small non-conforming lots, but by and large, most of our residential lots don't have that problem. And so therefore, a minimal variation from the 10% coverage area seems to me to be within the spirit of the intent of the ordinance to have to maximize the use of the green space of the property and minimize the coverage of accessory structures. And under these particular circumstances, I think we're consistent with that. So I think it's within the spirit of the ordinance as well.
All right. Other comments? Or are we ready to proceed to a motion? And if someone is prepared to offer a motion, Mike?
I'll try. I move that a variance of zoning ordinance 535-26 sub A and 535-19 sub F at residential property 3556 North Murray Avenue be granted to permit the construction of a 440 square foot garage.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kara. Toya, can you proceed with a vote, please?
Kara Espera,
Aye.
Michael Polson,
Aye.
Wendy Smith.
Aye.
Motion carried 3-0.
The request for variance has been granted, and you'll receive confirmation of that in a written order from the board. All right. Okay. All right, proceeding to item number 7 on our agenda packet, request for variance of Village Code 535-24 F sub 3 regarding frontage buffer requirements at commercial property 2521 East Capitol Drive. With this item, hopefully we have the applicant available here to provide a statement. First, I'm going to ask, you could feel free to come forward and have a seat up front. I'll first ask the village, our Inspector Burris or other representative, to make a statement relating to this particular request.
Director Greepentraw, can you raise your right hand? Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. So just an introduction, my name is Bart Greepentraw. I'm the village's Planning and Development Director. So the item before us tonight is for a request for a variance from the frontage buffer requirements at commercial property 2521 East Capitol Drive. The information contained within the packet, I'll just read for your reference. The applicant Mandeep Dhawan is seeking to perform substantial site improvements to the current fueling station located at 2521 East Capitol Drive. The scope of improvements includes new fuel tanks, pumps, and a canopy, as well as new pavement and perimeter landscaping. The applicability standards outlined in the zoning chapter's commercial landscape and site design regulations 535-24A2 state, quote, all new buildings, landscape, and site elements in the commercial and mixed-use districts must meet the regulations of this section 535-24, end quote. Frontage buffer requirements are detailed in subsection 535-24F. These requirements are intended to, quote, lessen the visual impact of on-site vehicular parking, loading, and other activities from the street, end quote. For 535-24F2A, they are specifically required, quote, along the perimeter of any off-street surface parking, driveway, loading, fuel pump, drive-through, or other vehicular areas, fronting street right of way, not including along an alley. The applicant has included a frontage buffer on his proposed plans. However, those plans do not conform to the requirements further detailed in 535-24F with respect to depth, fencing, or shade trees. The applicant has indicated that space limitations preclude him from meeting those requirements and is seeking a variance to install a 4-foot buffer rather than the required 5-foot buffer. As a result of the reduced space, he is also seeking a variance from including the required fencing and shade trees. The village received this request for a variance on March 19, 2024. The applicable zoning standards are found in 535-24F frontage buffer, which are included within your packet. With respect to staff comments, applications and approvals for this current project have been under consideration since August 16, 2023. Plans that were previously approved in 2021 have expired, so reconsideration needed to take place, and this has been done so under the revised code standards associated with the village's commercial zoning update, which was approved on February 6, 2023. Architectural improvements were approved by the Design Review Board on December 7, 2023, subject to obtaining approval of site and landscaping plans, which were requested to be deferred by the applicant because they were not comfortable meeting the requirements of the code. Revised non-compliant plans were received on March 14th with a request for a variance, understanding that they would be denied upon submission based on prior discussion.
Thank you. Questions for the village at this time? Mike?
Bart, with respect to the proposed fencing elimination, is there a requirement that the fencing be on the interior of this buffer or on the exterior, or does it matter?
So the code details that the fence must be located 2 feet from the back of the curb or edge of the vehicular areas into the buffer and a minimum of 3 foot from the front of the buffer. So with a 5-foot buffer, it's required to be minimum 5-foot buffer, 2 feet from the back, 3 feet from the front.
Okay, so obviously with a 4-foot, if a 4-foot buffer were granted, some portion of that requirement, basically the 3 feet from the curb, would have to be, a variance would have to be granted for that. If a fence were continued to be required, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So what were the changes?
So in 2023, the village adopted a form-based code that has very detailed specifications. So prior to 2023, it just required a frontage buffer, but did not indicate how big that buffer needed to be. It was up to the Design Review Board to determine whether or not it satisfied the intent of the code. With the update, we now have very specific parameters outlined within which the application is expected to conform.
And is it your interpretation that this specifically, 53524F, is specifically referred to when that provision refers to, property containing fuel pump? Is that kind of anticipating this is a gas station type of property?
Correct, amongst others, but yes, specifically gas station or fuel stations are definitely required to have that the current code.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a visual and safety kind of thing to make sure people on the sidewalk aren't, impacted by a car that might drive off, but it's also a visual thing to make sure that the right of way is beautified with respect to people that travel through the village. So it's dual purpose, I think, both safety and aesthetic.
Further questions for the village? Mike?
Would a 4-foot buffer serve the same purposes as a 5-foot buffer with respect to visual impact and safety? In your opinion?
Yeah, visually, depending on what is installed there, the design review board, I think, would be able to make that determination. So depending on the height and type of landscaping that's installed there, I definitely do think a 4-foot buffer could visually satisfy those requirements. With respect to safety, honestly, any sort of curbing could do that. So whether it's 4 foot or 5 foot, I don't know that changes that, as long as it is something substantial enough that vehicles can't, break through and get onto the sidewalk, et cetera. So in staff's opinion, yes, the standards were developed based on comparable sites throughout the village and region. So that 5-foot buffer is a common thing, but staff has no reason to believe that that 5-foot buffer is, the minimum for either safety or aesthetics.
The applicant, as I understand his application, and we'll hear his testimony later, asserts that narrow access to that outside pump requires him to reduce the buffer from 5 feet to 4 feet. In your opinion, is that a reasonable reduction of the buffer for that purpose?
Once
Or
again,
a necessary reduction, let's put it that way.
I don't agree that it's necessary. As I mentioned, the scope of the site improvements are quite substantial, and whether or not an additional foot can be found on site, I do believe that is possible. Additionally, there are multiple lanes that larger vehicles could fuel up at. So I know in the past it had been asserted that that outside lane was necessary for buses and things of that nature. Well, there's other pumps to fuel up with. So within early discussions with the applicant, it has been staff's opinion that they believe the 5-foot buffer could be met. The initial plans that were presented to the design review board back in December of last year did show a 5-foot buffer, but as I mentioned at the meeting, they requested those be removed from consideration because they were no longer comfortable with them. So physically, they have been able to design that with a 5-foot buffer. They just did not want to proceed with that plan, so they're seeking a variance instead. With respect to the prior question, I think a 5-foot buffer could provide more safety and more aesthetics, but I don't know that it's the minimum necessary. But within the conversation and the community engagement, 5 foot was what was determined to be the community's expectation.
Nothing further right now.
I guess I have a similar question, but with regard to the fence, we're also going to as well here. So
And I was going to ask the same thing. Is the requirement for shade trees and fencing, would you say that's a critical component to these ordinances, if the purpose of which is beautification, that if we were to grant applicants variance for no shade trees, would that substantially defeat the purpose of the ordinance?
Yeah, in staff's opinion, both the fence and the shade tree could be accommodated in the 4-foot buffer, and they are integral components of what the expectations are. So I see no reason why those could not be allowed to or could not be installed within a 4-foot buffer. I know the 5-foot buffer in discussion was talked about giving more soil coverage and things to the plant to thrive, but there are ways to plant a tree to make sure that it has adequate space for roots to grow, et cetera. So I think the shade tree and fence requirements can be accommodated within a smaller perimeter landscape bed if that is the way this application ends up.
Any further questions for the village? Mike?
sorry, I just want to clarify, is it fence and shade tree or fence or,
And,
so both are required.
correct.
As I
Mike,
remember.
a fence and shade tree.
Okay.
both.
Bart, as I remember applicants, application, and he can obviously expand upon that if necessary. I thought I understood the reason for removing the second or one of the shade trees was simply that it was going to be under the canopy as opposed to having anything to do with a 4-foot buffer. Is the location such that it would interfere with the canopy or vice versa? I mean, the canopy interfere with the tree?
I would defer to the applicant to answer that question. I know that it's very close. But like I said, on the initial plans that were presented in December, the shade tree wasn't, the shade tree or shade trees were included. So I'm not sure if that's a new thing, but once again, they're installing a new canopy. If the canopy needed to be relocated or revised or shortened or whatever needed to happen to accommodate the tree, staff believes that is possible, but I would defer to the applicant if he has further information with respect to the canopy requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Hearing no further questions for the village, we'll proceed with a statement from our applicant. Do we have the applicant here to make a statement? Thank you, and please make sure to speak into the microphone. Can you introduce yourself by name?
Mirza Beg,
Can you spell that, please?
Mirza, last name Beg, B-E-G.
Thank you. Can you raise your right hand? Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Can you provide us with a little bit more information about what challenges you feel like you have in complying with the village ordinance relating to this buffer area?
As you know, this is an existing gas station, and the location of the canopy and the dispensers are on the further north side, are too close to the sidewalk. Even now, when the bigger vehicle are coming in there, it's very hard for them to maneuver in the space. If they go to the interior of the dispenser to get fuel, it's very hard for them to get it in and out. So this a space that we are requesting to create a buffer for the bigger vehicle to move around easily, as we have submitted picture where the buses and others village vehicles come for fueling. It's getting very hard for them to maneuver if space is shrunk. And the canopy is existing. We are just replacing the existing canopy into the same footing. As the distance between each dispenser is specified for the two vehicle to go, if we shrink any of those things, then the whole criteria of two vehicle going on each side would be defeated.
So is it correct that a 4-foot buffer zone would be acceptable for the plans as you want them to be?
4 foot without the fence.
Where would a fence go in terms of the buffer? Does it go on one end of the buffer, like a northern edge or the southern edge, or can it be placed in the middle? And I'll pause, and maybe Bart is the better person to ask here, but where does the fence exactly go?
Yeah, so it's a smaller, short fence to like keep people from like walking through it kind of fence. So the code requires it be 2 feet from the back of the curb, so the inside of it, and 3 feet from the sidewalk part of it. So in general, it's in the middle of the landscape buffer, and it's intended to keep, things from crossing through, as a vertical barrier.
Okay. So just looking at the width of the buffer, for your plans, are you proposing that a 4-foot buffer, kind of ignoring the question about the fencing and the shrubbery, would a 4-foot buffer area be sufficient for allowing large vehicles to come in and out of that particular service lane?
It would be tight, but it would work.
Okay.
What is the current offer?
Can I mention one more thing? We
Yes,
never-
of course. Go ahead.
One more variance that we are asking, are we gonna do 2 separate variances that we have in the agenda about the dumpster?
That is not a Board of Appeals, that's the Design Review Board.
Oh, that's design review board?
Correct. That's a design adjustment from the design review board.
Yeah, so for tonight, it appears, at least from what we've been noticed in our agenda package, requests for variance for relating to the buffer and to the other requirements within the same zone regarding fencing and greenery, shrubbery, shade trees. Okay. Questions for our applicant? Is it possible, do you think, to plant shrubs and trees in a 4-foot buffer zone? If we're to say grant a variance relating to the width of the buffer to 4 feet, would it be feasible for you to comply with the kind of green space and fencing requirements within that
It
space?
has to be more closer to the sidewalk than closer to the curb. You know, like Bart said, there's a 3-foot distance from the sidewalk to the fence or wherever. So if that is moved further closer to the sidewalk, then it would be more practical.
And in terms of, have you investigated the shrubs and trees? There's a prior question about whether the feasibility of a tree could impact the location of the canopy.
The tree would be there because, as you know, the canopy is existing and we are just replacing and refreshing the canopy. So the canopy is gonna be out to the edge of the dispenser, and if the shade tree grows up, they're gonna interfere on the top. So they're gonna be touching and then causing other problem.
For other shrubs and other material, have you
Yeah, we
investigated
can
whether
do
that's
some,
possible?
some ornamental bushes or something like that, but not a shade tree. You know, which are smaller in size.
How many customers do you get at your gas station? Do you know? Give us an estimate.
You mean by the number? How many vehicle or? how
Well, I
many-
mean, is it a busy gas station? How many people do you service in this community? 400 a day. Okay, so it's an important business. And why are you making these improvements to your gas station?
I mean, we bought the property on the concept of being a busy place to improve the site for the community. When we got it, it's an ugly site right now with the old canopy and the improvement that we're doing to the garage. There was an eyesore when looking at the old garages. So we are improving the whole site, spending almost $1 million in the improvements for the corner.
Well, thank you. Questions from the board? Mike, I see your hand raised.
Am I correct in assuming that the new pumps will go in the same location as the existing pumps?
Yes, sir.
Is it, and that's because you're using as I look at the pictures, you're using the supports for the canopy, the existing canopy as supports for the refreshed canopy, so that all of it is going to basically, the position of the pumps and the canopy posts are all going to remain exactly the same?
Yes, sir. There's a footing which is for a canopy, which is like 5 or 6 feet deep and by 5 foot wide. So there is not enough space to move around any of those footing. And the dispenser has to have a certain distance from each other for 2 vehicles to pass and fuel. So basically it is a tight spot, but that it cannot be reconfigured because the building location and the lot size.
Further questions from the board?
Not at the moment.
Okay. So we have not yet decided anything yet, but if we were to propose to grant a variance to reduce the buffer size to 4 feet, but to not grant a variance for the beautification components like the shrubs and fencing, do you think that you could comply with that? If we're going to have testimony from others, I'll swear someone else in if we have another statement. Oh, come up to the microphone, please, and our clerk will swear you in. Can you provide your name, please?
Mandeep Thavans.
Can you raise your right hand, Mandeep?
Yes, I do.
Do you affirm? Keep it up. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
To repeat the question, if we were to grant a variance to reduce the buffer to 4 feet, but to continue to require shrubbery and fencing, would that be feasible for you, or are there additional challenges that you would like to explain to us as to why you wouldn't be able to meet that?
The fence is very hard, very hard. Requesting the remove the fence variant.
And so why would that be difficult to comply with?
Because it is already is too tight. If you look in the picture, if there's any vehicles, like the buses from the UWM, or the trucks, the fires department from the village of the Shorewoods, if you look at the picture, that's the space is very, very tight there.
And if we're referring to the agenda packet, it looks like
Turning
applicant's
radius.
pictures start
I'm not
on
gonna turn it.
21, page 21.
It's easily to hit the fence. Doesn't matter in the middle of the landscaping or doesn't matter of the edge of the other side on the Capitol Drives.
So is it your opinion that even if you have a reduced buffer, are you still going to have vehicles running into that area?
I mean, the trees, it doesn't matters. The bushes doesn't matter. The main is the importance to not to have the offense there. That's
And-
very that's very, very difficult.
Or one more comment, or the fence can be shrunk in the length, so it's not the full length of the curb. It's about like 5 feet more in from each of the entrances.
Okay.
That will give a little bit more of a turning radius ease for a bigger vehicle.
Okay. So if I'm understanding, it may be more feasible if it is shortened in length to allow for a greater turn radius for larger vehicles.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Are we only looking to grant these variances on the Capitol Drive side, or are we also looking on the Downers?
Yes,
Well,
on the capital.
Just the Capitol, okay.
Correct.
And for the downer side, there is no non-compliance in the proposed plans?
There's already fence there.
Yeah, the plans were compliant. It's just
Okay.
the new area along Capitol Drive is what is non-compliant with respect to what was submitted.
I see. Thank you. Mike, do you have a question?
A point was just raised as to the length of this buffer zone, not the width, but the length. Does the code require a specific length of this buffer? That's probably addressed to staff.
I'm looking at that right now. I'm not seeing something with respect to length, but let me, if you give me one more second to finish reading the full
Sure.
area. I mean, it does say, so 53524 F3 requirements buffer location. The required buffer area must extend the width of the vehicular area, but may allow for the perpendicular crossing of driveways. So with respect to the location, it does say it has to extend the full width, and then it goes on to include the requirements of a fence. A continuous fence is required in the frontage buffer as follows with respect to other classifications. So in my interpretation, the fence as part of the buffer location is required to extend the width of the vehicular area.
With exception for the driveway. So, and I raised the point just because somebody made a statement to the effect that if the buffer were somewhat shortened to accommodate a greater turning radius, that would take care of some of the problem. Is that, is that a design issue or is that a zoning code issue? Assuming that there is a specific cut for the driveway.
I'm not sure I understand the question, but this is, I mean, this is language within the zoning code. So I'm guessing perhaps the answer to your question is the zoning issue. The zoning code includes these design requirements.
So that in the, yeah.
And
I mean-
the language is that the fence must appear within the buffer zone, the buffer area.
Correct.
Yeah, but the question is how much of a buffer area is required? Can that be shortened to accommodate a turning radius? And if it were to be shortened to accommodate a turning radius, would that require a variance to shorten it? And if that were done, would that mitigate and perhaps or at least, mitigate the concerns with respect to the narrow passage for large vehicles that a 5-foot buffer would require?
I do believe lessening the buffer location would require a variance. As I mentioned, it says the required buffer area must extend the width of the vehicular area, but may allow for the perpendicular crossing of driveways. So other than the driveways, the code is requiring the buffer to be there. If there's a need for a buffer, of a shorter buffer, the staff would have directed the applicant to apply for a shorter buffer as a variance.
Okay. Perhaps just a distraction. Thank you.
Do we have further questions for our applicant while we have them at the microphone? So just for clarification on that buffer zone fence shortening discussion, is it my understanding that your design plans would be easier if you were to shorten the fence requirement, not the buffer zone requirement? Is that what my understanding? Both?
4-foot buffer with a shortened fence.
Yeah, so 4-foot buffer.
In depth.
Compliant with the length required in the vehicular area. But the request here is a shortened fence length.
Two, right,
Is that correct?
right. So that means a 4-foot buffer with a shorter length of the fence,
Okay, shorter length of fence, not buffer length.
not the buffer length. though.
Okay, I see.
Okay.
To accommodate, greater ease of vehicular movement there. Okay, am I understanding that correct? Okay, great. Okay, any other questions for our applicant? Hearing none. Mike, you look like you're.
No, I'm
deep in
good.
thought. Okay, with that being said, thank you for do you have any final words that you'd like to provide us?
No, I think that's all been
Okay.
understood pretty good.
Great. Thank you for your testimony. At this point, are there any members of the public or adjoining properties that might like to make a statement about this particular variance? Yes. If you can step up to the microphone and make a declaration of your name for our clerk to swear you in.
You bet. My name is Daniel Walsh. I live at 4024 North Stowell Avenue.
You raise your right hand. You affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
And I'm sorry, did you say 4024?
4024
Okay.
North Stowell.
Thank you.
I'm also here as a representative of Anita Cryer. She owns the property across the street at 2518 to 2524 East Capitol. And I've helped her renovate and re-tenant that building. It used to be the cattle changers building.
Okay.
So she has invested about $500,000 into that building over the past 2.5 years. So first, I've lived in Shorewood now. It'll be 33 years in July, and I've lived in the same place. I have attended numerous meetings for comprehensive plans, for the zoning code update. I attended probably 8 of those meetings. So here we are less than a year after we passed the code, and we're talking about exceptions. Not a great start, for one. Two, the entire intent of that code and most of these meetings that we've had in the comprehensive plan are to try to enhance the pedestrian experience, the cyclist experience. There was a meeting last week of Shorewood cyclists. This is a really important corner. I mean, there are no, except for the Atwater, which we're still fighting about, right? Because that was a wreck. this is the Atwater is the first time in 35 years there's been a development on East Capitol, commercial development. So you got to get this right. You just can't let this not work. And I think if you take this 4-foot, 5-foot barrier and you, if you would table this today, then you go out and look at where 4-foot and 5-foot barriers, how they're treated, how well the landscaping is taken care of. I'd encourage you to go to the Shorewood Animal Hospital. I'd encourage you to walk in front of the Atwater. I'd encourage you to go walk in front of the City Hall or the Village Hall here. People don't take care of it under any circumstances. They let the trees go in front of the Casanova on Farwell and Capitol. There's a bunch of barberry. They have a 3-foot space where they have a barberry hedge, which is always looking ratty. Many of the bushes have died. So when you drive by it or walk by it or cycle by it, the cars are right there. There's no screening here. You can't do this. This is a bad idea to even think about making this change. First of all, with all that being said, that like we're trying to fix things here and we're dealing with something that we have to ask our property owners to make much bigger investments to get the kind of village we want. But there's no hardship shown here. So they can't get a couple of big trucks in one lane. There's still the center lanes that they can get large vehicles in. So they haven't shown any hardship. They haven't shown that they're going to lose any money. Can't show that. I don't know how many of those 400 customers a day are these large trucks. What are they really losing? We have no idea. They're ripping up the whole site. They could easily accommodate this, as Director Griebendrag said. And then second, if you do this, you're not meeting the requirements of what we've been trying to get to at the village. We've had all this work over the past 30 years, and we keep undermining our good work for the residents. I'd encourage you to say no.
Before you step away, members of the board have questions for Mr. Walsh?
No.
Hearing none. Thank you for your
Great.
testimony. I appreciate it. Another? I think we may have had more than one. Please proceed to the microphone and introduce yourself, please.
Rick Hurlbus. I represent Northern Equipment Company.
Can you also state your address as well?
My address, West 244, North 6604, Westchester Drive, Sussex, Wisconsin.
Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
It is.
And can you spell your name, please? Your last name?
Hurlebaus.
Thank you.
Hearing the thing, we're talking about 63 square feet of landscaping area. One question I do have is on the fencing. The purpose of the fencing is for aesthetics or for safety?
Well, my understanding from the village testimony prior is that it's a little bit of both, but Bart, if you'd like to clarify that.
Correct, both, primarily for safety in terms of a vertical barrier between the sidewalk and the vehicle, but also an aesthetic looking fence, because there are certain requirements with respect to how the fence needs to look. So I would suggest it's both correct.
Okay, just depending how it is, you have a 4-foot barrier and now that fence has to be supported by something and you want room for the landscaping, the bushes and that. That's why they were, I think, asking if the fence could be tweaked a little bit, because you only got 2 feet here, 2 feet here. You want the fence to go down, and where's a tree gonna go? You'd, even on 5 foot, I think you'd only end up with 2 feet or 3 foot. But I think if the fence could be shortened a little bit, you could at least get a tree on both ends. The edge of the canopy is only 10 feet from the outside edge of that landscaping. So I've built plenty of stations where they require the landscaping with shade trees, which are beautiful. But after 15, 20 years, they're just growing into the canopy, and it's makes it more of a mess than what it's worth. You could keep the trees shorter is better. The issue with getting the larger trucks at a different location at the site, this site will have regular, premium, and diesel. Only one dispenser will be dispensing diesel, which is on the outside island. So the bigger trucks that have diesel, like a bus, can only fuel on that outside or that outside lane, or the inside lane of that island. So it's a little, and depending on which way they come in and where the fuel tank is, that outside lane usually works out the best for them because the fuel is on the passenger side and they don't have to circle all the way around and then try to get out and turn around. I think that is all I have to say. If you have any other questions.
So can you clarify, are you responsible for the design or for the proposed construction or both?
I'm basically I don't deal with the landscaping part. I'm more of the gas station, designing the canopy, laying things out. You can get into logistics of gas stations. There's a certain area you like because you have an island. You like to have at least a 10-foot overhang for the canopy, which serves the purpose of keeping them out of the rain. So shortening the canopy up or anything else, you're kind of deterring the idea of having a canopy. Spacing between to make it more safe for the cars to get through. That's kind of how the design goes with these units, and we're just basically trying to make that site look nice because I've done service work at that site since the late 70s and it hasn't changed. And I think all they're trying to do is to make this site attractive the best they can. And that extra 63 square feet of landscaping, I just don't think is going to make that big of a difference. And stating that bushes are dead or dying, isn't that kind of something that can be regulated by the building inspectors or something, or whoever goes around and checks these things? That's about it.
And just for clarification, for the diesel pump that may be used by larger vehicles, is that a pump location that can be moved easily or no?
You'd prefer not to, because understanding a diesel dispenser, those are usually the dirtiest, and you're going to get the bigger trucks, and you'd prefer to have those away from the front of your store because they seem to block the view. So if bigger truck is parked at the front lane closer to the building, the person in the building cannot see the fire dispensers that in case anything would happen.
I see.
So that's why we kind of keep that to the outside.
And so are you of the opinion of the applicants in that if the design plans that are proposed can be accommodated with a 4-foot buffer and the shrubbery and trees requirement can also be complied with if we grant a 4-foot buffer space?
I believe so. It's trying to plant a tree next to if the fence can be a little shorter, I think, which I don't know if that's an issue. It has to. Because if you can shorten the fence just a tad, you'd have room to put the tree in the 4-foot buffer.
Okay, and so the fence shortening here is to accommodate the required shade
I
trees.
believe that would help a little bit, I would think.
Okay. All right, further questions? Hearing none. Any final statement that you would like to provide?
No, that's about it. I just figured I'd throw my 2 cents worth.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other interested parties that would like to provide a statement? Here, please proceed to the microphone and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Joseph Altieri, reside at 3961 North Stoll Avenue, which is within 250 feet.
All right.
All right, can you raise your right hand? Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God?
I do. Yeah, I would just like to say, I was going to make the comment that I attend the gas station almost every day, just on a daily stop. And the large vehicles do always go on the outside, obviously because of the diesel. So I just wanted to say that when we were talking about moving it. But the other thing I would like to say is, in general, the feeling, if you go to the Facebook page and talking to people on the T neighborhood, which abuts this property, is pretty positive of what they're trying to do. And so my personal feeling, I'm not speaking for others, but it just seems that giving a little bit of abatement, making things a little bit easier after they're going to spend this all money seems worthwhile, especially with the decision on the Atwater was not a popular one with nearly everyone in the decision. That took up our lives for quite a long time and was a big mess. And so for people who are there, who are working at the gas station, which is popular and very busy, to make their life a little easier. I understand there's safety concerns, but I think the fence is a fence and it would be fine to have it just move back, I'll give them an extra foot. It'd be worth it. But again, the idea in the neighborhood of what they're trying to do is a positive one based on what I've seen online. So
And is, green space and the types of improvements to the ordinances, is that important to you as a neighbor of this property to continue to have shade trees, greenery, and fencing?
greenery, yes. Shade trees on that property, if you've looked at it, probably doesn't make a lot of sense, to be honest. Right now, it is a concrete pad across, right? And it is a very large canopy covering the three. So while I get the desire for a green space and something like this, I'm not sure a shade tree is really the best, right? You're talking about shade, you're talking about a very large canopy that covers nearly the entire property. For greenery, I don't disagree that it would be nice to have something, say planters, but as they mentioned too, if those could be on the other side of the fence, probably makes a little bit more sense. Not covering the sidewalk still allows them the variance, and yes, it is a green, something to beautify the neighborhood.
Do we have questions? Hearing none. Any further statement you'd like to provide?
Nope.
All right, thank you for your testimony. All right. Any other interested parties that might like to make a statement? Reviso, okay. Mr. Walsh is providing an additional statement. Hopefully you can.
Just one
brief-
very quick. It would be helpful, I think, for everybody to see if elevations were provided. So I think it's really hard to make this decision as a board, as a design review board, as a planning director, because there's no elevations in the plan set that I saw that was part of what was provided in the materials for this meeting. So with respect to how wide the fence is, how far from the driveway they are, where the shade trees go, how tall they would be, how tall that fence is, what's the word, how easily you could see through that fence. Because the whole idea is to enhance the aesthetic and of the corner. And so perhaps if you wanted to be sure that you were what's the word, protecting the village, you could ask for an elevation so everybody would actually see what this would look like.
So do you mean a more detailed plan?
Well, what you have is plan view. So you're looking at it from above. And so there's some green space there, but there's nothing given as to what the height of maturity is for any of those plants, how tall the fence is going to be, the fence that they don't want to put in. All those things should be part of your review of this, because you have no idea what that's going to look like.
Well, the height of the fence is prescribed in the ordinances, right?
Correct.
But it just says ornamental fence on the plan. It doesn't say like what's the distance between the balusters, what's that going to look like? What's the materials? Is it just a black aluminum fence?
Those are design review board
Part of
issues,
this.
not Board of Appeals issues.
Yeah, I mean, if we have, if we're considering a variance, and if we were to require that this property comply with the fencing requirements, we have criteria for what the fencing requirement has to be in terms of height, at least as stated in the ordinance. There is no additional requirement as to appearance. Is that correct, Bart? In terms of material?
No, there are
or-
code requirements with respect to fence materials. The fence must be black, gray, or dark green steel. Masonry columns, maximum 2.5 feet in width at the base, maximum 18-inch in height are allowed, but are not required. The fence must be a minimum of 3 feet and a maximum of 4 feet in height. Fence opacity, the fence must be a minimum of 25% and a maximum of 60% opaque. So those would be items that would, if they were to apply for a fence, we would require that plans be provided to confirm that those are code compliant. But in this case, they are applying to not have a fence, so we don't have plans including that detail because they're seeking to not include that detail.
Okay.
If they were, those plans would be required for the design review board before it was approved.
Thank you.
My point is protecting the community is understanding what's going to be built there. And if you have to make a finding that granting this variance protects the community and meets the requirements of the zoning code, which is what you're finding has got to be here, you don't have enough information to be able to make that determination given what you've been given.
Okay. Thank you. We'd like to proceed. We do have a third variance request, so we would like to proceed. Yes, you may approach the microphone for a brief follow-up comment
As we have
for our
agreed
applicant,
to-
Mr. Dick.
to the fence by shrinking the length of it. I mean, the security and safety and the aesthetic would be there if the fence is shrunk by few feet. So the security that Bart is talking about would still be there with the fence And then all the fencing requirement by the village would be met as we had talked about it. So what we are asking to give as a variance for the 4 foot, which is a 1 foot, which is required by instead of 5 foot, and the length of the fence should be shrunk. So we will do the shrink the fence and then do all the shrubbery as required by the village code within that space. So we are not doing anything defeating the purpose of beautifying the village, what they're trying to do. We're just trying to accommodate what is available to us and meeting the code as much as possible.
Thank you. Any further statements from interested parties? Hearing none, shall we proceed to deliberation amongst the board and close this hearing session?
So move.
Okay, do you have a second? Yes, Karen. Okay, we'll proceed into the board's deliberation as to whether this property and the request for a variance meets our standards of review. In consideration all of the testimony that we've received tonight, it seems to me that there are factors specific to this property, particularly relating to the availability of certain fuel lanes to larger vehicles, that may justify decreasing the buffer width from 5 feet to 4 feet. And perhaps we should look at this in chunks in terms of the buffer width and then the additional request relating to shrubbery and fences. Are there any thoughts here about whether the property and the intended use of the property can justify granting a variance to the requested 4-foot buffer width?
I think, I think I can find unusual and exceptional, extraordinary circumstances here. In the sense that we are dealing with a property that is an established gas station, which with the footings, the canopy, the building location that are essentially a part of the landscape, if you will, a part of the lot that make this an unusual and unique property. They are not movable, is basically what it comes down to. And so they're just as if this were bedrock that could not be blasted out. These are essentially foundations that we have to deal with, which I think create a situation where there could be found to be unusual hardship if we were to enforce a zoning requirement that made it difficult to operate this particular location in the manner in which it has traditionally been. I'm certainly fully cognizant of the position of Mr. Walsh that we're dealing with something that was adopted, only a year ago. And if we were dealing with new construction, I would have no compunction at all about enforcing the code literally, because I think at that point, if we were dealing with bare ground construction of a gas station at this location, there'd be no excuse or no reason nor any hardship with coming up with a design that would meet the code. But we're dealing here with a situation where we have existing permanent additions to the property, which I think we have to realistically consider part of the property, and that I think they can be considered to justify circumstances where we could find some variance, find a variance would be proper, assuming we can otherwise find that nothing in those changes would harm the public interest or be inconsistent with the purposes of the zoning code, or would somehow undermine the purposes of the code if it were to be applied elsewhere in the village. I think when we're dealing with a renovation of an existing property with major components that cannot be adjusted, We're not dealing with something that can, oh, we can just move the pumps an extra foot or something like that, as we would if we were dealing with brand new construction. I think we can find that a variance can be justified and that we would not. And I also think we could find that we're not defeating the purpose of the code, because the proposed buffer, 4-foot buffer versus 5-foot buffer, would serve exactly the same purpose of protecting pedestrians, bicyclists, the aesthetics of the location. We then have to deal perhaps with the other components of that, but a mere fact of a 5-foot versus 4-foot does not defeat in any manner the purposes of the code. And for example, that viewed from the property across the street as an example would not be able to tell if it was a 4-foot or 5-foot. So it has no impact that way. So to me, would be consistent with the code purpose and intent and the public interest if we were to narrow the buffer from 5 feet to 4 feet. That's where I'm coming out on that part. I'm a little, and if we do it to 4 feet, it seems to me that well, then we deal with the other issues.
I agree with Mike in that it appears that there are factors here specific to this property which make it a particular hardship in complying with that 5-foot buffer width, specifically in relation to the existing footings for the canopy, the placement of that diesel pump location, which may accommodate those larger vehicles. And the testimony that we heard that even if that diesel pump were to be relocated to another area, you would still run into perhaps a safety issue with having large trucks blocking, say, the visibility of the owner or operator of the gas station. So in terms of the circumstances relating to this property, I do think that we can argue that there are exceptional or extraordinary special circumstances not generally applying to other locations that would support a buffer reduced down to 4 feet. As for whether granting that variance would be a substantial detriment to adjacent properties, or whether it would materially impair or the purpose or spirit of the zoning code, it still will be a buffer. It is a decrease in the width. Yeah, I do agree with Mike that the spirit of compliance and the purpose of these provisions appear to be still maintained.
And to agree. I don't love looking for a variance against a code that is so new, but I also think, because it is so new, that there are going to be growing pains while we try and figure this all out. Respect to the diesel pump, just on a personal note, my dad drives a diesel car and he goes out of his way to a gas station where big trucks can't fit in because he wants to be able to access his diesel pump. They're always in a corner. They're never in the middle of a gas station. So I do sympathize with that. I also think that applicants didn't have to do a renovation, right? What they're doing either way is going to improve the overall aesthetics of that corner. And I would rather be in a position of helping them make that happen instead of maybe scrapping the project altogether.
Okay. Further comment on that first portion about buffer width, or should we move on to the additional request, which appears now to be, based off of applicant's testimony, a request for variance to shorten the fence requirement. And my understanding is the applicant doesn't object to the green space requirement, but they are interested in shortening the fence length requirement.
Are we allowed to consider that, given that that was not what was proposed? Or is it something that we would need to, send back for?
I think we can consider it because the variance request is to remove the requirement for fencing.
Mm.
We can grant a variance on the fencing subject to conditions. The condition in this case would be it's a variance provided that the fence is at least X feet long or something, you know. So it's not granting the whole variance, but it's granting the variance with conditions. It seems to me we can go there if we wanted to.
Have we, I mean, I guess, done a study on looked at what an appropriate length fence would be if we were to alter it?
We have not. I'm still a little confused as to why a shortened fence would provide any greater maneuverability because in theory, the car is going to be driving through landscaping and other mulch where the fence would otherwise be. So with respect to the buffer in totality is not intended to be driven on or over. So I'm as staff, I'm a little confused as to how a shortened fence is helping the case.
Or at least my understanding of the testimony is that the shortened fencing would accommodate the proposed trees. Do we need to reopen hearing component here to get clarity on this length of fence issue? Yeah. Okay,
I think we could.
okay. May we have a representative of the applicant who could come and explain to us why exactly the length of the fence needs to be shortened? Whether that's relating to vehicular access or whether it's to accommodate trees.
It's kind of a both because we were requesting fence be eliminated and the shade trees to be. So now in accepting the fence, so we are requesting that the shorter fence be allowed and then we can accommodate the shade tree to the end where the fence has been shrunk. Oh, yes, so I don't know what the requirement is, so that means what he's saying is instead of a brick pier, it should be a steel post that goes to the edge of the fence.
I would think that the design of the fence is appropriate for the design review board.
I'd be happy to clarify. It says masonry columns and base, blah, 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 are allowed but not required. So there is no requirement for that to take
So
place.
we
So you
will
would not need a
match the
variance
fence
from that.
which is on the existing landscaping area. So that fence would be matched on the Capitol Avenue side.
And the shortening of the fence, the shortening of the width would be for the purposes of planting trees on
We
either
will
end.
plant a tree which does not go too high. So, something, you have a tree, but the height would be limited to a certain point.
And the placement of those trees as proposed would not give you problems with the canopy? If they're
Well,
placed
that's
on the
what
end?
we're gonna do. We have to see how we can accommodate something to look into that, and we'll work with the village about the plant species of what can be planted, so it's aesthetically good and also not interfering with the canopy.
All right, thank you. Okay. Proceeding back to deliberation.
Okay.
Thoughts on the proposal here where it appears per applicant's testimony that we're requesting here shortening of the fence length requirement by some kind of unknown length to accommodate compliance with the shade tree requirements.
Sounds like that's the purpose of it, and it seems to me to be reasonable. It minimizes the extent of any variance that we would be granting.
In terms of specification, do we need to know exactly how long that fence needs to be?
I mean, I would prefer it. I would prefer not to leave it vague and open to interpretation. So, and I don't know how we get there.
One proposal is to address the buffer width requirement, the request for the buffer width, and then postpone deliberation on the request for or offer reconsideration of the variance application for the fence, provided the applicant provides us with additional detail on what the length of the fence should be as proposed.
I
Mike?
think that would be fair.
Mike, do you have thoughts on whether that's feasible or not? Or can we frame it in a way that we can avoid future proceedings?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way that we could phrase it. I mean, I would think that shortening the fence by no more than 10 feet. At the length of the fence, the minimum, shortening at the minimum to accommodate 2 required shade trees.
Okay, so
Would be a way of phrasing it. Without putting a specific number of feet on it, since we're not in the position to do that.
Were there a number of shade trees that were recommended?
I think the plan would require, I mean, if I remember right, the code would require 2.
Correct.
and is the placement of the trees on both ends, would that be in compliance with the code?
Correct. So one shade tree is shown on that stretch where the buffer is larger and the canopy is further away. It is the one on the western edge of the buffer that is not included. So if I'm on page 19 of the packet, if you have it in front of you. So yes, on the eastern edge, a tree was provided. On the western edge, a tree is required. With respect to the fencing is not shown on these plans. So how close that fencing can get to the tree without impacting its growth or maintenance would be a question perhaps the village forester could answer. I don't know, but I personally don't have the answer to that question.
Okay.
But we do have a forester on staff that would know how street trees generally are treated.
We're not going to get to that. Okay, so perhaps we can phrase this as if we were to grant a variance for shortening of the fence length, we may be able to phrase it as shortened only as much as necessary to accommodate shade trees in placement on the east and west locations of the buffer zone in compliance with the municipal code. Right, because I would have the fence being at the minimum amount of decrease in fence length to accommodate the shade trees. Or we can require the applicant to resubmit a variance request when they have a plan demonstrating the length of the fence.
I just don't know if putting it at either end is actually gonna be what they want. 5 feet off. We could say that. I just don't know if that actually accomplishes.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then they would, yes.
Mike, do you have thoughts on how we proceed?
I tend to think that if we're going to talk about shortening the fence, that the way you just phrased it, to the extent you can repeat what you just phrased, does it, because I think between the village staff working with the applicant, a reasonable accommodation on that can be done to emphasize minimal reduction of the fence length. And that can go beyond staff that are present here today, obviously.
All right, then are we ready to proceed to a motion? Because I can propose a motion and see if that works. Okay.
Go ahead.
Let's see, let me just make sure my wording is correct. Okay, I move to grant a variance of Village Code 535-24F sub 3 regarding frontage buffer requirements at commercial property 2521 East Capitol Drive, in that the buffer zone width is reduced from 5 feet to 4 feet. And I'll end that motion there and propose a second motion addressing the other components. Do we have a second on that motion?
I second.
And can we proceed to a vote on the granting of a variance for reducing the buffer width from 5 feet to 4 feet?
Michael Paulson,
Aye.
Kara Espera,
Aye.
Wendy Smith.
Aye.
Motion carried 3-0.
Follow-up motion, I move to grant a variance to Village Code 535-24 F sub 3 regarding regarding frontage buffer requirements at commercial property 2521 East Capitol Drive relating to the required fencing where applicants are granted a variance in the length of fence as much as necessary to accommodate placement of shade trees in accordance with the municipal code. Do we feel that that's sufficient?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mike. We proceed to a vote.
Michael Paulson,
Aye.
Wendy Smith,
Aye.
Kara Espera.
Aye.
Motion carried 3-0.
Now, I believe that our interpretation of the applicant's testimony is that they are no longer asking for a variance relating to shrubbery. So I believe that's where we can end this. Yes, okay. With that, request for variance as to buffer width has been granted. The request for variance relating to fence length has also been granted only as necessary to accommodate the shade trees on either end of the buffer area. You'll receive written confirmation of the variances from the clerk shortly. Thank you for all of your testimony. All right, proceeding to item number 8, request for a variance of Village Code 535-19 E sub 5 regarding maximum lot coverage at residential property 3711 North Downer Avenue. A statement from the village, please.
Yes, so Dan Gengler, the applicant, is exploring the construction of a new single-unit residence on the vacant lot at 3711 North Downer Avenue and is seeking a variance from the maximum lot coverage standards for a principal structure within the R5 Single Household Residence District Number 1. The applicant does not yet own the parcel, but is requesting a variance on the requirements as due diligence related to a potential purchase. The applicant is seeking a variance utilizing a zoning review that was performed for the current property owner in September 2023 for a single unit house, which included an attached garage with living space above that covered 37.37% of the lot. Per code, only 30% lot coverage is allowed for a principal structure. The applicant would like to construct a house of a different design on the lot, also with the attached garage, up to 37.37% lot coverage ratio detailed on the previous plan. He did not want to purchase the lot or pay for the design of a house of similar coverage if a variance was not on file. His justifications are included within the attached application, which the village received on March 19th, 2024. Applicable zoning regulations 535-19E5 lot coverage, maximum 30% of the lot for the principal building on an interior lot, 40% of the lot for a principal building on a corner lot, plus up to 10% accessory structures. Staff comment, as noted in the September 11th, 2023 zoning review, the existing lot is non-conforming with respect to minimum lot area. The R5 district requires that lots be at least 6,000 square feet, but the existing lot in which a house was previously constructed is only 5,847 square feet. The zoning review was performed for a house with an attached garage. Since that garage is attached, its square footage is included within the principal lot coverage. Had it not been attached, the associated square foot would have been calculated and reviewed separately under accessory structure lot coverage, which may occupy 10% of the lot.
All right.
If the house or if the lot was 6,000 square feet, would it be within the 30%?
Table here. So the footprint of the proposed house was 2,185 square feet. If someone can do or quicker math than I can, that is more. Let me pull up Excel, sorry. Do you have the answer, Dan?
It would still be over.
Correct.
And the reason for the overage here is the attach, or at least one of the factors pushing it over the acceptable limit is the fact that the garage is attached, and that calculation impacts the overall lot coverage as opposed to if the garage was detached.
Correct.
Okay.
And so if it were a detached garage, he'd be permitted 40% lot coverage if it were detached, but by attaching it, it becomes 37.4% in round numbers. Because it all becomes part of the principal structure. Is that correct?
Correct. And attaching the garage also allows you to have living space above the garage. If it's an accessory separate structure, you're not allowed to have that living space. So you're not only getting a bigger floor print, you're getting a second floor as well. That's also larger. But
Okay.
yes, if it's 30% principal structure, 10% accessory structure, 40% total. In this case, they're looking at 37.37% in total with that living space above.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. One other clarification on your zoning review talked about potential of a proposed side yard parking spot. Is that not at issue anymore?
Correct. He is not requesting that. That was under the previous plan, but that is not part of the current requests or the current application's request.
Just wanted to make sure what we were exactly talking about. Thank you.
Further questions for the village? Okay, so the only issue here is the lot coverage percentage. We have no other issues relating to setback as the plans are proposed.
Correct. Yeah, there's no actual plan for the house that he's proposing to construct. He's seeking a variance to design up to 37.37%. But he has indicated he would abide by all setback standards that are required.
Okay. And from your understanding of looking at at least the preliminary plan submitted, does that appear to be in conformance with setback requirements?
Correct. That plan that is in your packet, that did conform to setback requirements.
Okay. Hearing no further questions, do we have a representative for the applicant that would like to make a statement? And if so, please approach the microphone, provide your name.
Hi, Dan Gengler.
Can you raise your right hand? Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Can you tell us more about this property that you'd like to propose development on and the need for garage space so that we can better understand maybe the special circumstances and conditions of this property?
Yeah, absolutely. So this lot is a little bit unique. It's been vacant for a couple of years. The previous structure was taken down in 21 or early 22 in that time frame. And so with it being unique, it's an interior lot, no alley access, and it's very shallow compared to a standard Shorewood lot. So that obviously shrinks the allowable square footage you can build on the property, which is a bit unique and outside of, again, what the typical or average lot size is for this district. So with the orientation of the lot being shallow, it makes it really difficult to put a detached garage on without taking up a principal percentage of the lot, or the green space or the usable area of the lot, because with it being detached, that kind of kills the space between the garage and the house. It takes up a bunch of the backyard and you know, eliminates a lot of the usable space. So by building it attached, it's a lot more efficient. It makes better use of the lot, and it's a better orientation for the lot. With the packet, I also submitted a number of other properties along Downer that kind of fit the same criteria of smaller lot sizes and over coverage per current zoning. So it would be pretty typical for the neighborhood, and would be a better use of the lot that would further maximize the value.
All right. And have you proposed, or have you kind of had any formal plans or informal planning of whether it's even feasible to place a detached garage in conformance with like the setback requirements on this property, given where the driveway is, and whether that's possible?
I know the previous owners did that. I've seen the plans. It is possible. But again, the problem with that is it eats up pretty much the entire yard to comply with the rest of the setbacks. So there's no usable green space other than the front yard, which being on Downer, it's a really busy street. I don't know if I'd want my kids principally playing in the front yard.
All right. Questions for our applicant? Hearing none. Any additional statement that you'd like to provide?
No, we're, partner and I are excited. We think it'll be a great fit for the village and get a family in there and
Oh, great. Well, thank you. All right. Any other interested parties, neighbors that might like to make a statement? Please approach the microphone and introduce yourself.
I'm Dusty Lorino. I've worked with Dan before,
Oh,
Can you raise your right hand? You affirm that the testimony about the gives the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
yes, I do.
Can you spell your last name, please?
Lorino.
No.
I've worked with Dan before. The projects that he's been involved with have all been really successful. In this particular case, I think that the uniqueness of the lot is the fact that it is so shallow, and that the footprint of a house with a detached garage will actually take up the majority of the green space, because even though a driveway isn't considered a permanent structure, it does use up a lot of that green space that could be used by having an attached garage. Putting a house up that, and the majority of the houses in the village are detached garages, which in today's world is sort of a functionally obsolete home. And if you're going to build a new home, it would make a lot more sense to have the garage attached from a practical standpoint. And in this case, because of the shallow lot, you're going to use up the green space in the back of the lot for the garage, and the driveway space is going to take up the rest of your green space. So it only makes sense to be able to put a functional home with an attached garage and living space above it in lieu of a detached garage with a square box and a no yard at all. So building practical homes in the village would be a goal that I would have if I were in his shoes, and something that somebody else would enjoy and benefit from. So literal enforcement to the code in a case like this would be creating the hardship on this particular project, and it would benefit the village a lot more and the general public to have a home there that would have more aesthetic appeal and more practicality.
and this may be a question for you, Dusty, or the applicant. Is it possible to continue to have a attached garage with reduction of the floor plan size of the home? And why would that not be a possibility of simply reducing the footprint of the overall structure to get it down back to that 30%? Perhaps you can explain whether that's a possibility here.
yeah, so with the percentage that a two-car garage would cover, which is what the intent would be to build, that would leave a very small, kind of impractical footprint on the first floor to actually have living space in. So our intent would be to get the variance for the design maximum, but we would try to make it much more efficient, closer to the, in the spirit of the zoning code. So,
And I'm sure I missed this within the packet, but what's the proposed bedroom? How many bedrooms are proposed in this home?
It would be 4 bedroom.
4 bedrooms? Okay, and if you were to reduce, I mean, to get into conformance with the 30% lot coverage, would you have to reduce the number of rooms or bedrooms, or what's kind of
Yeah.
the practical impact of that?
It would likely reduce the number of bedrooms. Like I said, I haven't fully executed a design yet. But in the 4 bedroom, and in what the range we're looking at fits well. Once you start reducing that by a couple hundred square feet, that's easily.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks for that follow-up. It appears that we have someone on the Zoom call with their hand raised. Do we have someone on the Zoom that would like to provide a statement? And if so, can you please introduce yourself and be sworn in?
Sure. I'm sorry, I had a drop and I just rejoined the call, so this may have already been covered. My name is Mara
Sorry.
Suki,
Yeah,
and I own the property with my sister Jessica at 2601 East Newton Avenue.
And can
Anyhow,
can you repeat your name, please?
Mara Suki, S-U-C-H-Y.
And you're
Okay.
the owner of a neighboring property.
Across the street,
Okay.
kitty corner.
Okay, thank you.
Anyhow, and I apologize if this is already addressed. So I read through the material. It looked like there was an extra parking spot separate than the garage. Is that correct?
My understanding is that extra pad parking space is no longer proposed.
Correct.
Okay. All right, that's what I want to ask personally. Jessica, did you have anything you want to ask?
Oh, we need to go back a step.
Oh, sure.
Mari, do you mind repeating what you just said only after our clerk swears you in?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm just going to assume your hand is raised, Mara. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I apologize for that. If you'd like to reiterate any of your prior statement while sworn in, you can proceed to do that.
Okay, I was just questioning whether there was an additional external parking space separate than the proposed garage. And the answer is that is no longer being considered. So that was my question.
Yeah, great. Yes, that's my understanding.
And my sister does not have anything else to ask besides that.
Okay, and do you have any particular statement as to the impact of these proposed plans as a neighbor of this property?
I'm sorry. I missed. I just came on a few minutes ago, so I really don't unfortunately know enough. Jessica, if you are still on, if you're able to speak for us.
My only concern.
Jessica, can you please introduce yourself and then allow yourself to be sworn in?
Yes.
Can you state your name,
Jessica
please?
Suki Pilalis. You can see the spelling on the screen there.
Mm-hmm. And do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Would you like to provide a statement relating to this request for a variance?
Yes, just to support the inquiry of keeping the percentage as it is. That whole idea of keeping that, well, let me back up. We are on the southeast corner of Downer and Newton, so we see this property. And if we look on the documents that were provided with this house and some of the other homes that do not meet the percentage, the 30%, we live in a home that probably has one of the biggest green areas on its lot. And so I would just encourage that be looked at to the greatest extent possible to keep that 30%.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Is there anything else you'd like to provide?
No, thank you
Great.
very much.
Thank you. For the individuals in the room, is there anyone else who'd like to provide a statement either for or against this request? Yes, please approach the microphone and introduce yourself and allow to be sworn in.
I'm Tom Price. We live at 2516 East Newton Avenue.
Can you raise your right hand? Sorry. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Our property backs up to the property that's in discussion. And we had a couple questions. Is this going to be owner occupied or is it a developed? And sell it? But you wouldn't be occupying it? No.
So to clarify that statement, Mike, if you didn't hear that, is that the developer, the applicant, is intending to build the home and then sell it to a family. So it's not intended to be owned by the applicant. Go ahead.
Our concern is what are the setback requirements in the back? I don't have a plan to look at, but
Bart, can you provide some clarification for the neighbor as to the setback?
Sure, the side, side north, south, and rear setback are all a minimum of 3 feet.
within what?
3 feet,
3 feet, so it could be built 3 feet from our lot line.
correct, without requiring a variance.
So it'd be considerably larger than the house that has been torn down on that lot.
No, the placement could be different, but we're here to discuss the largeness, quote unquote.
Largeness.
So yeah, the placement could be up to 3 feet, but the size is still to be determined.
So that's something that would be in the design review board, is that right?
Under consideration today is the proposed
This-
plan
the
is
square footage.
to go up to over the 30% allowable lot coverage.
Right.
So necessarily that's going to result in a larger looking house because it's taking up more percentage of the lot size
Right.
than is what is currently permissible under the code.
Right.
But the previous house was also.
Is that accurate, Bart? Was there a?
I did not do a zoning review of the house that was previously constructed. The plans in your packet represent a house that was also proposed, but not constructed. So there was a house on this property that was torn down 2 to 3 years ago. I did not do a zoning review on that property.
So up for consideration is the placement of the home on the property and how much space it takes up.
Right, and how
But
close-
it appears that the proposed plans do not violate what is lawful under the code for setback requirements.
Right. Yeah, in terms of, I know you mentioned that you wanted to have a backyard. And now, I guess on the original plan that I saw last year, it was, right, it was like right up, pretty close. Right. Sure. Right, well, that's mostly our concern is.
Well, these seem like they're issues that are not before the board. But if you'd like to chat with the applicant after the
After.
hearing, that might be better, just to keep
Okay.
it focused, given that we are at 7:30 already.
Yeah.
So any other further statement about supporting or opposing the request for the variance, which would be just relating to lot percentage?
Yeah,
So the coverage.
as long as it includes the garage as part of the structure, I don't see that that's going to be a problem.
In terms of the attached.
No,
garage.
if it's attached to the house, yeah.
Okay.
As opposed to a separate, separate garage, which would probably take up more
Yeah, right.
square footage.
Okay. Thank you. Any further attendees that might like to make a statement on the record relating to this request? Hearing none. Are we ready to proceed to close the hearing portion of this matter and deliberate amongst board members? And if so, may I have a motion to deliberate and close the hearing?
But first, there's someone who has their hand raised on the Zoom call.
Mari, are you still wanting to make a statement or are you just holding your hand up in continuation of your last?
Oh, no, I guess it never was lowered. No, I don't have anything else.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sorry.
I do that all the time. All right, with that,
I move to close comments and move in.
Second.
all right. Okay. So again, here we have our standards of requests for a variance. So where we're looking for those extraordinary or unique circumstances relating to this particular lot. And we have had testimony indicating that this is a very shallow lot, which may suggest that the unique properties of the lot should dictate a small variance in lot coverage size. Although it does seem like it may be feasible to have a detached garage of similar size, although admittedly cut into the green space backyard type area if it were to be put as a detached garage. I'm a little bit on the fence as to whether that's a true hardship or whether that's just a preference of the developer as to how much of a yard they want and whether that's sufficient to justify granting a variance here.
My 2 cents is that the unique nature of the lot would impose a hardship on the applicant if he were forced to build a detached garage, which he clearly theoretically could do and cover 40% of the lot, plus driveways and other impediments to the use of the lot. But that in fact, that would be imposing a hardship on him and a lesser use of the lot area of an attached garage, a single structure would use less of the area of the lot, impose less of coverage on the lot, create more green space, and be more consistent with the intent of the ordinance, which to me seems to be to impose minimum coverage to the extent practicable on a lot, and so that to me it seems that the unusual and unique circumstances of a very shallow lot impose a hardship if we did not grant the variance, that the more practicable modern use of the property and more valuable as well to the community would be to grant a variance in this particular case, because to deny it would impose a hardship, a practical limitation on the ability of the applicant to properly develop the lot in conformance with current living standards. That's where I come out on it.
I think I would agree if the applicant owned the lot or was the intended occupant of the lot. But I think right now we're looking at potentially granting a variance for, people who have no current interest in this. I don't know. I'm just really struggling with whether or not there's even like practical difficulty or hardship here, given that if we don't grant the variance, it's not gonna there's only something to gain here. There's nothing really to lose, I guess.
Well, if I may put in my 2 cents, because the hearing's been closed, and so, but it seems to me that the premise of the application was that in order to do any construction on this lot, a variance would be required to permit a modern contemporary home to be modern home. I don't know how contemporary the design will be. A modern home consistent with market demand, which is what would be consistent with what any potential new owner would be. That it's reasonable to assume that this developer has as much interest in proper use of that lot as any potential owner would, and all we're doing is jumping in ahead of the process and instead of waiting to find an owner who would be willing to undertake the actual construction. So it seems to me that the fact that this is a developer versus a potential owner directly is really irrelevant to the ultimate desire or the ultimate impact of an area variance.
We have closed the testimony component of this hearing. Is there something material that you would like to add very briefly? Can you speak into the microphone just for
Yeah.
for Mike's benefit?
Yeah, just to the point of interest and ownership, I do hold the option contract, so I'm paying accepted, so I intend to
okay.
close on it, given I'm not just, kicking the tires for lack of a better. We've taken a lot of steps to intend to.
I see. Thank you. For me, I think it almost seems like we're assuming that the property owner or the intended property owner has a right to a 4-bedroom home on that property. And I don't think that is an entitlement. So if we're thinking about this in terms of hardship, the hardship is that the applicant doesn't get the 4-bedroom home that they want. But I'm not sure that there is justification in supporting hardship in building a smaller sized home that fits on the lot and meets the percentage lot coverage requirement, even with a very shallow property. So the design as proposed, yes, I'm sure it'll be a very, very nice house, a very large house, larger than my own house. But just because the property exists does not necessarily mean to me that there's an entitlement to build it just as the developer wants to build it without some additional justification. And if it's feasible that a detached garage can be built within the property and to meet the setback requirements, or a attached garage can be built and meet the 30% lot coverage requirement, it seems almost that it is just preference to not comply with those code requirements. Any further deliberation by the board at this time? Hearing none, do we have a proposed motion to act upon? Or any follow-up questions that we'd like to ask the applicant?
I'll phrase a motion so that we can vote. I move that the request for a variance of Village Code 535-19 E sub 5 with respect to residential property 3711 North Downer Avenue be granted to permit an attached garage house to be built with an area not to exceed 37.4% of the lot size.
And do we have a second for consideration of that motion? I'll second that. Are we ready to proceed to a vote?
Yeah.
Joya, can you call a vote, please?
Michael Olson,
Aye.
Wendy Smith,
Nay.
Cara Espera.
Nay.
Motion denied, motion failed, 1-2.
The request for variance has been denied. A written follow-up affirming that decision will be sent to you. All right. With that, I believe that we've come to the conclusion of today's agenda meeting. If no further objections from board members, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you and good night.
Good night.